ever since the April 2nd Liberation Day, we've had kind of big gyrations in the market for containerized shipping, and ultimately oil is underlying all of that, of moving the cargo around and providing energy for all the companies out there in the world. What we've seen since the tariffs is you had a 60% decline in shipping from China to the U.S. when the tariffs were so high for 5 weeks. And then when those got relaxed back a month ago, then volumes came way back up. I think it's too early to say how the Middle East, how this situation with Israel and Iran, if we do, let's all hope, get a ceasefire here, a little bit too early to see how that will impact. But I mean, the big thing that everybody's watching is, does this pave the way for reopening the Suez Canal for containerized freight? You know, ever since December of 2023, all the container ships in the world have been going around Africa rather than through the Suez because of the attacks in the Red Sea. And so we're going to see now, does this change the game there? Does this potentially pave the way for reopening that, which is kind of crazy to talk about? You know, even this morning or yesterday, and certainly last week, no one was thinking that we were on the brink of potentially reopening the Red Sea. So let's see how this plays out.
Indeed, right. So, Ryan, I mean, this is something that data and data analytics is not going to tell you. So I'm going to ask, what you're hearing from clients. I'm sure you've been on the horn with them. I mean, what are you hearing, and what do you personally think about what the president announced just a short while ago, a permanent and complete ceasefire between Israel and Iran? You were saying that it's still too early to tell?
Yeah, I mean, it's very, we just learned about the ceasefire within the last hour or so. So it's very bullish, obviously. I mean, people are very concerned. About 3% of the world's container traffic goes through the Strait of Hormuz. So it's a lot less than on the ocean, than the oil market, where you see more like 20 to 25% of oil barrels flow through. But it's still the 10th largest container port in the world is Jebel Ali, which is in Dubai and in the United Arab Emirates. So that's inside the Strait of Hormuz. So that's actually a major transshipment port for shipments coming from India and the Indian subcontinent, Pakistan, India, and other countries in that region heading to Europe. Many of them will stop in Dubai on the way and get transshipped. So people were really concerned about how that would disrupt those flow. And that's to say nothing of the air freight market, where obviously a major crossroads of the world. Most of the major Middle Eastern airlines have big cargo businesses supporting cargo trade from East Asia into Europe. A lot of it stops there in the Middle East. So this will be very, very bullish if we can actually get to the other side of this.
Yeah, and we have to note that airspace around Qatar has now been reopened after being briefly closed because of these Iranian airstrikes on Al Udeid. So I want to get your take on oil as well, Ryan. We've been watching oil literally tank. It's at 71.48 right now, so it's closing in on 70, which means, that usual $10 a barrel geopolitical risk premium that a lot of experts talk about, that's literally evaporated, right? And, I was telling viewers earlier how traders have been saying that, look, that's simply because the risk has shifted from supply disruption in the Strait of Hormuz now to things like what we saw overnight, right? Attacks on Al Udeid Air Base and continuing threats from Iran to target Americans wherever they are in the world. Do you believe that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there were some threats earlier this week from the Iranian regime saying they were threatening to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, you see it in the data. It's not a credible threat. Most of the world recognizes, and certainly those sophisticated traders in the market recognize, that the Strait of Hormuz has never been shut down throughout all the conflict that we've had in the Middle East for the last few decades. The Strait of Hormuz has never been shut down. The ships actually transit through territorial waters of Oman, which is an allied country, let's call it, with Iran. They're certainly not. It would not be easy for them to shut that down. And the amount of retaliation that you'd have, first off, from the United States and its allies, but also China depends on oil flowing out of there, and they're not going to support any kind of shutdown of those oil imports that are so important to the Chinese economy. And then add to that, Iran themselves need to export the oil for the revenue that sustains their system and their military and everything else. So it's sort of not really a credible threat. And if that's all that they have as a retaliation, it probably painted a picture for for Wall Street, for traders, that, hey, this is probably going to de-escalate pretty quickly, because if they're threatening the Strait of Hormuz, they don't have a lot of other cards to play.
Yeah, indeed. Right. I got to ask you, we've been talking about freight rates spiking, right? Insurance as well. And this is the surprising thing, right? Given just how bad the situation could get in the Middle East, that this kind of business is actually still insurable, but it's not cheap.
Yeah, it is very interesting, because that's the insurance has been the big thing that's preventing container ships from going through the Red Sea, is that the shipping risk is so high. Now, container ships are way more valuable. They're bigger, more valuable, and also just carrying a lot more valuable stuff. And there's many more parties involved. So if a container ship were to sink, you'd have just a lot more lawsuits. And that may be partially to explain why container shipping has been so disruptive going through the Red Sea, while these oil tankers are still able to transit the Strait of Hormuz, which on the surface may be seen as riskier, but there's also just attacks in the Strait of Hormuz would be seen as much higher stakes, much more likely to invoke a retaliation from the United States, its allies, and even intervention from China and other countries in the world. The Strait of Hormuz is just critical for the world economy, and so many countries depend on the oil flowing really to sustain the livelihood. The oil is needed for agriculture as well as for industrial purposes, and keeping everybody's trains moving, cars moving. The Chinese economy really depends on those imports, not just from Iran, but from the entire region they're passing through. So I think that people recognize that it's unlikely that a state actor like Iran would take action, whereas non-state actors or the types of attacks that we've seen in the Houthis are maybe a little bit riskier and more likely to happen.